Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is the first episode of 2024 and episode number 180, The Performance Practice of African Choral Music with Ezeakacha. The quest for diversity in Western art music has led to the influx of Westernized African music into the choral canon, albeit tagged as world music. This approach to the inclusion of diverse repertoire has led to the homogenization of indigenous African folk tunes by non-indigenous composers, thus creating Western-sounding African music. This is from Chukwuebuka's summary of his research that he is preparing as part of his doctoral work. So I invited him to come on the show. In this episode, we cover more than just a how-to do this better. We discuss issues of diversity and access and the possibility that many popular approaches to these ideals are counterproductive. We also discuss the peculiar and reductive ways that we in the Western world discuss diversity while using extremely reductive terms like broad skin color categories and continents of origin, etc. After all, if we use reductive terms like African music, we are missing out on most of the beautiful diversity that the vast continent of Africa has to offer. Chukwuebuka suggests a helpful, easy-to-remember framework that he calls the 3 Res: resource, research, and resolve. We discuss the mistakes many directors make along this continuum as it applies to the music of sub-Saharan African musical traditions, as well as the music of any culture that is not your own. Stick around for this great episode. I think you'll really enjoy this fresh perspective. Attention, performing arts directors. Are you looking for a platform that understands your unique needs? Look no further than ludus.com. Built from the ground up for the performing arts by people from the arts, Ludus is the perfect solution for your organization. With Ludus, you can drive revenue with ticket sales, merchandise, and fundraising, all while saving time, money, and resources. And the best part? It's 100% free to your program. Sign up for Ludus today and take your performing arts program to the next level. Choralosophy listeners can go to ludus.com/choralosophy for an upgrade for free to their marketing suite. One of the best ways that you can scratch your back and scratch mine at the same time is to enter Choralosophy at checkout. When you go to sitereadingfactory.com once or multiple times per year, however many it is that you do to renew your membership, your students' memberships. Also, when you get sheet music at graphitepublishing.com and endeavormusicpublishing.com, you can enter Choralosophy at checkout on those websites and save as well. And of course, getting the best choral folders on the market at mymusicfolders.com allows you to enter Choralosophy at checkout to save at all of those great vendors. Patreon members really keep this show going financially every month, making sure all the costs are covered out of pocket. But they also get access to my Google folder of goodies, the private podcast feed. They find out who's coming on the show ahead of time, and a variety of other fun little conversations that we're able to have over on the Patreon page. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Brannigan Lawrence, Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, Jonah Clicksbull, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, DF, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Heron, Nathan Hines, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. All right, everybody, I'm here with Ezeakacha. He is a Nigerian choral musician, a Nigerian living in the United States, and I believe studying in Oklahoma, not too far away from where I am here in Kansas City. And he's got a passion point, and that passion point is helping us understand certain aspects of the performance practice of indigenous African music. So welcome, Chukwuebuka.
Thank you, Chris. I've been a follower of your podcast, not since you started it, but since it gained traction and since I saw the plethora of topics you've covered and are very important to me. And so it's really good to be on this show, on this podcast. Thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm glad you're here. Why don't you start out by telling us a little bit more about you? I kind of gave the basics there, but just who are you and what led you to what you're doing there at OU right now?
Cool. So I'm a Nigerian American right now. I'm currently a permanent resident, long road to residency. Another topic for another time.
Awesome.
I'm studying, well, almost a doctoral candidate at the University of Oklahoma with a focus in core conducting. And what led me to, fun fact, I have a very interesting backstory. So Nigeria is a very beautiful place. It's a place that anyone would want to stay in the right conditions. However, not everything, the thing about life is that if you don't find what your passion is in a particular place, you got to go to where you can find it. And so in my place, in my language, there's a proverb or an adage that says you don't stand at a particular place to watch a masquerade performance.
Mm,
So we have a big thing about masquerade. It's a whole big tradition and celebration, a figure. And so you don't stand in one place to watch a masquerade. It implies that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. Similar. And
okay.
so you gotta have different options to get to where you want or see what you're trying to see. And so I I decided to try other paths in getting to my dream, which is to be a choir conductor. I've been a choir boy since I was 7, and being in the choral music is what it's typically the only thing I know.
Mm,
Well, not the only thing I know, but it's what I love to do. And
right.
so I figured if I'm gonna have happiness in life, I might as well just do what I love, which is choral music. And in Nigeria, we don't have the specialization for choral conducting. And now, my story is the story that really shows that America is a land of opportunities. You can really be anything you want to be here in this country because everything is actually possible. Everything, and I mean everything. So, back in my country, in Nigeria, it's difficult to have a dual degree or study 2 programs at the same time. But I was able to do that when I got to the US. So I applied for a master's degree in communication, which is close to theater. I had an agreement with them to audit music classes because I wanted this. I wanted it. I didn't just audit the classes like, a regular sit-in class. Now I audited the classes like I was getting credit for the class. I took the exams, I did the assignments, I did everything, the whole 9 yards. And one would think that I was actually registered in the class because I really wanted experience, and it was kind of difficult because I was in the same class with very young students, people who I was way older than. My first entrance exam, I took the entrance exam again, and I aced it, or as you would say in Nigeria, I smashed it. And so I was very that experience really got me going. So
Can
I
I
think,
ask you a question? I want to ask you a question about part of your story that
yeah.
before we get too far down into it. Um, you all of the extra work that you had to do when you got to the U.S. to qualify for one of these music programs. What was your attitude about that at the time? Did you feel like, okay, this makes sense because I need to know all this stuff or I'm not going to be successful? Or did you feel angry or bitter about it because they weren't just accepting you as you were?
So a part of me was, I mean, it was a rude awakening in a good way, in a good way. As at the time, as at 2016, I thought I was it. I thought that at my level, as a Nigerian musician, I thought I was. I mean, what could you look for? I was a very enthusiastic performer. I was very. I mean, people like to watch my performances, and so I thought I was all that until I did an online interview and I realized I didn't even know what was a progression of 1 4 5 chord. I didn't know what that was, but I it was later on I realized that, oh, in my own knowledge, it's so we use solfege it's a main thing in Nigeria. Solfege is an established notational system in Nigeria, and so I figured, oh, this is do chord, a fa chord, a sol chord, back to a do chord. So it's 1 4 5. Using figured bass. I didn't know those terms. I didn't know those applications. I didn't know functional theory. I didn't know how it functioned in terms of tonal harmony. I didn't know all this. I just knew the practical application. And so, of course, I felt sad that I wasn't taking at first into the music program. And then I saw that, oh, there was a lot to learn. There was a huge lacuna in my knowledge in my knowledge bag. I needed to really augment for a lot of things. I'm like, you know what? This gives me the opportunity to start fresh and be as good as I should be.
Right. And so
So
then, of course, you do all that learning of what some would call like Western music theory, and you get that background and that knowledge. And now here you are back into your research, your doctoral research, where you're wanting to talk about indigenous African music. So talk about that, how that full circle happened.
yeah, I realized that as an immigrant, I was always looking for representation. I was always looking for I was something was missing in all of my studies and everything I was enjoying to learn at the time, and the new knowledge I was gaining, the new heights I was achieving as a performer. Something was missing, and that was representation. I found out that I I could bring African music and teach, but they were not properly notated. So I realized that with the notation system in the US and in the globalized standard notation of staff notation, we didn't have that a lot. It was just a recent that, well, say from like 2010, 2011, 2012, that notational softwares became a thing, like a, a real thing in Nigeria that, okay, if you want to be seen as you're a serious composer, you got to notate your music using staff notation. And then the software Sibelius made it easier because that software has a plugin for staff and tonic solfa, which is solfege, what we call here. And so most Nigerian composers started to use that plugin so that majority of the Nigerian choral musicians who were not really trained in um, who do not have oral training or like oral skills or who cannot sight read staff can at least be able to learn music. Still seeing the staff notation, but see the tonic solfa either on top or below. I wish I had something to share my screen to share like, what like a staff and solfa score looks like. And and
Okay.
so and so I realized first off there is the issue of resources. There's not a lot of resource on indigenous African music to perform in the US. What you find are um, folk melodies from Africa that Western composers have arranged or tried to put their own spin on it. And then that is what I refer to as a homogenization because you find African music sounding Western. And so some of them that I heard while I was in while I was still um, while I came to the US, or some of them I heard, I'm like, okay, I'm struggling to understand what I'm hearing. I mean, if I didn't see the title in the program or on the score, I wouldn't know that this was African music,
Yeah.
but but then I see the title, I'm like, okay. And then I try to listen and it's giving um, um, Western harmony,
Right.
and the rules of Western harmony it doesn't apply to African music. It doesn't apply because African music, you have the rules. We don't follow the rules of parallels. We do parallels. We do fourths and fifths. We do all and thirds. We do everything. As long as so, why do we do that? We do that because African indigenous, well, sub-Saharan African music is subservient. And so the melody is subservient to the text.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the text, for instance, Nigeria, most Nigerian texts are tonal. And so, because the language in itself is tonal, it is expected that you have to have the melody um, work for the text and not the text working for the melody. So, say for instance, my full name, I have you can say Chukwuebuka. Chukwuebuka is the way it's said, and then you know that there's Chukwuebuka. You gotta have to follow that tonal inflection. Pa, 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 pa.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if we're so if you're gonna use solfege to write that, you would say like do chuku e buka.
Ah.
It makes sense what I'm saying right now.
Yes. No, I get it.
So,
Yeah.
so with that, you're singing exactly as you would sound when you speak.
Yep. Yeah.
And so,
That makes
and
sense.
so, and then another thing I spoke about this in my lecture recital, in my doctoral lecture recital that I gave last year. The moment you change one tonal inflection, you're saying something else.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful. Take for instance, a word like egg. Egg in my language is called aqua. That is you know the way you say aqua, like water, aqua.
Mm-hmm.
So we say aqua, which is pa pa. So the tone marks are going to be down and up on the as. Aqua. Now imagine that you say that same word, but with the tone markings of the way we would say water, like aqua in the Latinized
Spanish
form.
or yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, aqua means something else. Aqua means clothes.
Ah, yeah.
So if you don't use aqua, if you're trying to say egg and you say aqua, you're saying something else.
Right.
And then if you say aqua, aqua means something else in my language. So because of these textual nuances, most of the music we find here are music by Western composers, which are very generic and sound very Western. Another thing is that we find melodies that are indigenous to African folk songs being anglicized and used in other ways. Take, for instance, you must have heard this "Sing Noel, Sing Noel, Noel, Noel."
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's an indigenous Liberian folk tune. That's an indigenous Liberian folk tune, and the title of the folk song is called Banua. Banua, Banua, Banua yo. Banua, Banua, Banua yo. Banua, Banua, Banua yo. Neni alano, Neni alano. That is sing me on Noel, sing me on Noel. And I'm like, you take that tune, you put it into English text, and then you term it African Noel. What exactly is African about that song? This was the brainchild. This was the genesis of my research. I'm like, you know what? How about we have a collaborative experience where we have indigenous composers learn the right way to notate their songs and publish them, have someone who can help bridge the gap in the knowledge structure, and have non-indigenous performers have access to these works and perform them correctly.
Yeah.
That that way we don't have to find people, well-meaning Western composers who have obviously good intentions, but the output doesn't necessarily represent authenticity.
Right. Now, you've probably thought about this, but I, of course, I think it's valuable to zoom out to the cultural context that you just outlined first before we dig back into the music, because one of the things, and I'm interested in your experience too, as an immigrant from Africa, because I've had similar conversations with several folks who don't come from the U.S. originally, but have arrived here to discover this really peculiar American way of boiling everything down to the smallest possible word that we can describe something with, aka African, to really to mean anything from a gigantic continent with hundreds of different languages and ethnicities in it. And what does African even mean? If you say it could mean 100 different things or 1,000 different things. And we also do the same thing where an American would look at you and say, "Well, you're a black man." Okay, well, what does that mean? That what do I now know about you that that is important based on that? And it is kind of an American thing. And I'm interested in your experience as an immigrant. And this musical research that you're embarking upon, to me, it seems like those are the same problem. They are the same problem, which is that I look at you, I'm kind of trained as American to look at you and think of you first as a black person, and second, oh, I find out you're from Africa, so now you're African. I don't usually even know to ask, where in Africa are you from? What language do you speak? What type of music did you grow up doing? And so, of course, an American audience would look at African Noel and not even blink because they wouldn't see that that's a problem. Am I sniffing up the right tree here for you?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You're definitely hitting, you're hitting home the point that my research is addressing. And
Hmm.
so uh, I will give an instance. There's this, this piece,
Oh,
Bethlehemu,
yep. Hmm.
yeah, it's a very popular piece here, and now it was titled a Nigerian folk song, and I'm like, is it actually Nigerian? Because that's just one language in a plethora of languages in Nigeria. And so by already giving an umbrella term, a Nigerian folk song, you cannot use one culture to represent everyone, which is what we're driving at. And so say African music is a lot of things.
Hmm.
And when we talk about the continent of Africa, if you notice the write-up I've been putting out, I use sub-Saharan Africa. I don't say African because we have North Africa. North Africa is predominantly
Hmm.
Arabic and French. North Africa, you have countries like Tunisia, Egypt, um, Algeria, Morocco. These are predominantly Arabic-speaking African countries that
Yep.
are closer to Europe. And so when you say African music, are you also talking about them? Because they have musical structures as well. But then again, when I say sub-Saharan Africa, I mean the countries that are within East Africa, West Africa, and South Africa, because the musical cultures of these regions are similar. Now, does it does it actually cover inherently all the styles? Of course not. It's a ton of musical identities that exist within sub-Saharan African. So personally, I try to say, okay, I use my experience in Ghanaian music, South African music, Nigerian music. And when I say their music, I mean art music, not like their popular music, but the art music. The art music structures of these countries that I've had experiences in are similar to what my own cultural experiences are. And so I can I can make an informed guess that rhythmic identities are similar, tonal structures are similar, text nuances with regards to melodic configurations are similar. And so by that, I would say that African music is a vague term. I don't say African music. If I'm bringing a piece, I'm going to tell you this is a Zulu piece from South Africa. This is a Xhosa piece from South Africa. This is an Igbo piece from Nigeria. This is a Yoruba piece from Nigeria. This is a Twi piece from Ghana. This is an Ashanti piece from Ghana. So it therefore informs the notion that when you're bringing a piece from a particular part of the world, it's not just enough to give it an umbrella term, but you actually have to pay respects to the identity of the culture you're bringing it from, because they are a people and they need to be represented as well.
Yeah. Choralosophy listeners will remember RyanMain.com, but he has recently created EndeavorMusicPublishing.com, which is something different, something bigger, and something better. Endeavor is not a marketplace. It's a traditional publisher with a 21st century business model, which means that they have editing. Each piece is chosen and selected with accessibility in mind. Endeavor supports composers with a majority of the sales going right to the composer. Plus, there are tons of voicings to fit the needs of your program, instant downloads, full recordings, practice materials, and more. So head over to EndeavorMusicPublishing.com now and check out the catalog. Here's a way, and feel free to use this in your own personal life if you find this amusing. But one way to turn that around on Americans, especially in the conversation about music, is to listen to some music that's from somewhere here in America and just say, "Wow, that sounds American."
That has happened recently. So I'm a big fan of country music, and my dad always had tape records, like tape cassettes of country music that he dubbed from the radio, and so I grew up listening to country music as well. And so when just recently in church, there's a song written by a local uh, parishioner, and she titled it "The Christmas Gator."
Okay.
You know, it's about an alligator that saw the star up in the sky and thought it was lightning and all that. Apparently, there's a story behind it, and so I made that comment to my choir members. You know, I'm like, "Hey, this is very good American music." And they started laughing because they knew that they know that I make such remarks, and they understand that I'm not trying to be sassy or trying to be petty, but they understand that I'm only saying what I'm saying because apparently not a lot of Americans know that there are different identities within the whole country of I mean within the whole continent of Africa or even the country of Nigeria. Someone had asked me this before. So, do you speak Nigerian? And I'm like, yes, we speak Nigerian just like the way you speak American here. And she was like, "Oh, I see what you did." I'm like, "Yes, I'm glad you saw what I did." So, of course you, of course you speak English in America, but I said no, you speak American. You know,
Yeah.
there are many languages in Nigeria, and if she had bothered to ask a little bit more questions, she may have known that there's no language like Nigerian.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
and
and
you
so
would think Americans would understand very easily that using the word American music doesn't make sense if you're going to describe all of American music, because you'd have like something obvious like, well, country music, like you mentioned, doesn't sound like jazz, and Americans would understand that those are two different types of music. And yet we're not trained, and I when I say trained, I mean it very literally. I do believe that this kind of comes in American schools. We're not really taught very well about how to ask questions about diversity. So, for example, we are taught a lot in America that diversity is good and we should love diversity. But then, what terms do we use? We use reductive terms like black, white, brown. Like, what is a brown person? How many different places could a brown person come from? And we know nothing about that person once we know that color category to put them in. And I think because that's how we're trained to talk about it, we're trained to talk about it that way. So then when it comes time to be inquisitive about actual diversity, like you're describing, then I don't think we're very well equipped for that conversation. And I think that's why the work you're doing is so important. And it's, of course, one of my pet peeves as well. So I feel like this is a really good topic for us to discuss. So when you are when you're telling people or when you're doing your research about this topic, what are some ways that you can see to help choral musicians do this better? When we're trying to program music for our concerts, what are some resources, or are you trying to create resources to make this easier for us in the future?
yeah. So speaking of resources, in my research, I have a three-pronged approach to the production of uh, indigenous sub-Saharan African music in the U.S. So when I say production, I mean like the programming, the preparation, and the performance. Now, of course, you cannot program what you don't have a resource to, and so it's a two-way street.
Okay.
There's the composer's responsibility, which is the indigenous African composers, and then there is the performer's responsibility, which is the non-indigenous performers, which could be either American, European, wherever in the world. And so it is on the indigenous composer to produce the resource. And when I say produce the resource, it's not just enough to write a song, but you also have to be able to put it in a way that your non-indigenous audience are able to articulate it with minimal stress. Um, there was a song I wrote. Well, speaking of African Noel, I took that melody back to the roots, to its Liberian roots. I did the research, asked a few. I interviewed a few Liberian indigents who know the origin of the song, And I searched about resources for the song, and as it turns out, there are resources about the song. So I found it a little bit distasteful that the person who took that melody and put English text to it did not do the research to find out who owns this melody, where is it from, what language is it from, how did it come about. And so I took back that um, I took back that melody and did an arrangement with the original text,
Hmm.
and put the percussion in it. Now, when I this leads me, I mean, this is still talking about the indigenous composer's responsibility. So when I put that music into notation, I put up the IPA for it. And
Okay.
so so IPA is a huge deal in my research because I thought about it. I came to the US. I couldn't sing German art songs. I couldn't sing leaders. I couldn't sing Italian songs. I couldn't articulate French diction, but I took these classes, practiced, and as an immigrant, I can sing songs in these languages and sound, you know, at the barest minimum, I could sound very, people could comprehend what I'm singing. Anyone
Right.
from that language could
Yeah.
comprehend what I'm singing. And so I thought about it. I'm like, okay, what if I reverse engineer IPA? And if I learned these art songs using IPA, learning the diction using IPA, how about I develop IPA, say using my language, for instance, because of course I'm going to have a case study, and my language, the Igbo language, is the case study that I'm using. So say I develop Igbo IPA, I think it would be easy, or it would be less difficult for people who are not Igbo speaking musicians to look at the IPA of the language and be able to articulate the alphabet, and so
Yeah.
because of how and so if it has worked for other languages, I think I feel it can work for the Igbo language if produced. And so I did the same thing for the piece that I wrote, Banwa, and I put the IPA there, I put the transcription, and a colleague of mine took the piece and performed it at her conducting recital.
Okay.
I didn't teach the song. She used the material that I had in the song, the IPA, the translation, the text, and the notation to teach the song, and they sounded so beautifully. You can look it up. It's titled Banua, Banuwa. Um, it's also on my YouTube channel. It's also on my YouTube channel. It's up there. The only thing I came to do at her rehearsal was to help to teach them how to act, sound a little bit more African than, I mean, the text was okay. They sang it perfectly. It was sounding good. But there is also that thing about our accent.
Hmm.
I can take up a country song and sing it, and I'll be sounding very formal in English, unless I have understudied a country singer and know how they nuance their words for me to sound like them. And
Right.
so the only thing I did was I came to the rehearsal and like, this is how you should sound. So rather than singing in tall vowels, how about you sing more open, but like lateral rather than vertical, sing open rather than tall, make it a little bit more. So rather than singing oh, sing, ah, that was all I did. Make it sound very, very, don't try to refine it.
Right. It sounds, I mean, well, and even you using the word refine it, um, may, would center the languages that are the European languages that we are all trying to sound like in Western classical music. So, for example, the entire project of bel canto singing style training comes. I was thinking about this as you were talking about your language and the different pitches that come out of your language. Well, everything about the Italian opera singer style of music in the 1600s also came directly out of the Italian spoken language. They were learning to sing the way they speak. And that is actually normal for every indigenous music from anywhere in the world. Is our singing is an extension of our speech. And when we learn the style of music from a certain place, I think it's part of that research that we have to dig into is what does the spoken language sound like?
Sound like it.
We need to know what the spoken language sounds like, and I think that's a really important insight. That's true of a lot of Spanish-speaking countries. Their folk music also takes on the characteristics of the way the Spanish language sounds when we sing it. So I think that's really important. Now, I have a question for you too, and I think it's related to maybe continuing to dig into this. The underlying cause possibly of why these things are so confusing. So, for example, in the U.S., we as we covered already, we talked about how just vastly diverse Africa is as a continent, and we use these reductive terms to refer to it over here. Now, let's say though you're listening to this conversation and you're hearing us talk about this, and you're saying, "Well, yeah, I don't want to be reductive either. I want to make sure that everyone is being represented, and I want to make sure that I'm being as authentic in my presentation of this music from wherever in Africa it comes from." But my goodness, now I'm starting to realize that Africa is actually the most diverse continent on the planet, and there are more different types of ethnicities and languages in Africa than anywhere else in the world. In fact, in the rest of the world combined, there are there are more cultures in Africa and languages and language families and all these different things. So now I'm just overwhelmed, and since I want to do it right, I don't want to do music from Africa anymore at all. Now, of course, I'm being funny, but like, so I guess the question I want to hear your feedback to directly is we at some point in our journey to do this music, there has to be a balance between like I want to get it right, but at the same time, I could study an entire lifetime to not know what you know about the music from where you live. And so, what do you tell the American choir director about how to strike that balance so that we're still exposing our students to this music, but also not realizing that we can't study it for 50 years before we put it in front of our choir? Do you know what? Do
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I'm
yeah.
saying?
Yes, yes, I do. It all boils down to the issue of access, resource.
Hmm.
And resource could be both pedagogical resource and human resource. Now, the easiest way to uh, create a panacea to this Malay is um, technology.
Right. Yeah.
So when I say technology, I a lot of things happen on Facebook. A lot of things happen on different platforms, and I use Facebook for instance because um, there's this page I belong to. I think you're also on the page. I think it's a Choral Hub or something. Has to do with choral music, and I see a lot of posts. People post things there, and in a space of minutes, responses are coming. Responses are being given. I can tell you authoritatively that there are tons of African musicians in the US. There are a lot of there's a lot of us here. I can tell you for a fact that I know at least 25 Nigerian musicians studying in the US from different languages. I mean, from different ethnic groups. And
Hmm.
so, if I want a resource from, say, the Yoruba tribe of Nigeria, and and I don't know any Yoruba person, of course I know a lot of them, but say I don't know any Yoruba person, and I go on Facebook and or in one of those forums and I type, I need help with a Yoruba choral music from Nigeria by a Yoruba composer in Nigeria. You will find answers.
Yeah.
They, it just takes one step. Google is your friend. A lot of
Right.
times people don't understand that there there are things that we see as very gigantic projects that we may not be able to achieve, but just a simple Google search will narrow it down for you. Take for instance, I you want to perform, say, music from Zambia, and then you just type choral music from Zambia. You will see a lot of them. They are there,
Uh huh.
So the thing is, I don't think people give indigenous African composers credit enough to to think that they can find their music online. Pretty much everything is online these days. So that excuse for me doesn't really, that idea of, oh, we cannot wait for so long to perform this music or to get versed in the culture to perform the music, and so we'd rather just not perform it. I don't buy that. I
Yeah.
think I think that each choral musician knows someone who knows someone who knows someone that knows another person from a particular culture or that's well versed in African choral art music or sub-Saharan
Right.
African choral art music. So it's just a matter of putting it out there, throw the net and see what it catches.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and you're right, especially if the issue or the roadblock for a conductor is getting the answer to a particular question or a word pronunciation or a performance practice. But I think the issue I'm trying to outline is a little bit deeper than that. In that,
Mhm.
I think in this era of being very sensitive about cultural appropriation, there is also the fear of I could do all that research and have my choir still not sound authentically African or whatever culture from Africa, as we've been discussing, and be criticized because I didn't do it well enough. And
Well,
and that
yeah,
doesn't
yeah, I'm
that
sorry.
probably I was going to say that probably that criticism isn't going to come from a culture bearer. Probably it's going to come from some other colleague on the internet who says that they didn't do a good enough job or that they shouldn't sing music from that culture because they aren't from that culture. And so I think that's where that's where my question comes from for people who are just nervous for of how much work it would take to truly sound authentic to avoid that type of criticism. I'm not saying it's a good reason to not do it, but I'm saying that I think that is out there.
Which is what I was going to come to. That was the point I was going to rest on. And you're right to say that more often than not, the criticism is not from culture bearers.
Right.
You know, a culture bearer who will say something about a work from his culture or their culture would not be saying it to criticize it, but rather give pointers to how you can be better.
Yes, because they
So
like that you're doing that music.
we want you to, look, we want you to perform our works.
Yeah.
It's a thing of joy to hear an American choir perform. I'll give you, look, I've done this several times. Do you know the kind of traffic that my Facebook page had the moment I posted? There's a folk song from Nigeria that I posted, and there's this Texan girl. She took the soprano solo in the piece. A lot of people were asking, how did she learn it? They were so impressed at her delivery.
Mm-hmm.
We want to see our, our indigenous languages performed in the diaspora. We like our songs to be performed. We want to see these things. We're happy to see the excitement and the joy that non-indigenous performers get from performing our works. And so what I say is, it doesn't really matter if the person, I mean, if you're getting criticism, especially if that criticism is coming from someone who is not representative of that culture, does it really matter? Do I care to listen? I don't want to be haughty, but at the same time, I don't care. If I'm performing, yeah, if I'm performing a Spanish song or a song that is indigenous to Mexico, I don't want to use the word Spanish. Say I'm performing a song that is from the Inca people, and say someone who knows about the Inca tribe is telling me, "Oh, you could have." You would see that the way they come with their correction or their criticism is not a destructive type. It's more of, this sounded wonderful, but maybe you could have done, maybe next time you could do this, maybe next time you could do that, and not saying don't perform it at all. You shouldn't be performing it. You're not from that culture. You're not from that tribe. You didn't do it. So no, one of my I don't know if I should say this, but one of my teachers performed a South African piece, and I know the piece. I know the language nuances of the Osa people in South Africa. I've researched it. I have a friend who has also taught me the language. So I'm not speaking as someone who has researched it. I'm speaking as someone who has learned the language.
Hmm.
And so I guess I was a little bit perplexed that this happened because this teacher of mine knows that you have resource persons in and around the School of Music, but you did not use them.
Right.
So it's issues like this that make me want to continue this research even more because you find people who should be informed musicians not doing the informed, I mean, no, not taking the informed route. So why would I have someone who is a culture bearer and not even try to discuss the song? I'm not saying come to my rehearsal to teach I'm trying to just discuss the piece. Let me just get an insider perspective, you know,
Right.
of what this looks like. So I guess my response to your question is this. If someone is criticizing a piece that they're not a cultural bearer of, especially an African piece, I mean, I speak for sub-Saharan Africa I speak about, not for, I speak about
Mm.
sub-Saharan Africa. And maybe I say I speak for Nigerian music because I'm well versed in the choral art music of Nigeria. If someone is also, I'm sorry, this just popped in. There are people who may know about the language, but may not know about the musical nuances of that language.
Hmm.
This is a big thing because you can find someone who is maybe a native speaker, but does not understand the rules of music with regards to that language. I've seen this. I've seen this a couple of times. I've seen this happen. Someone who can speak the language and will come and speak the language to you, but may not be able to translate it for you musically. Because, of course, music is a language of its own. And so, just like the way I explained my name to you, I could speak it, but if I'm not able to explain my name musically, you may not understand the concept of tonal inflection with regards to melodic configuration.
Hmm.
So, someone who is not well versed in the musical application of tone marks and uh, subservience to the language tonality may not be able to really pass on the message.
Yeah.
That and so that's another thing I talk about in my research. But yeah, if someone I don't believe that people should not perform works from other places. Heck, I grew up performing works by Handel. I'm not
As you should.
I, yeah, I'm not German. I'm not English, but I've done Messiah a ton of times. I've done the coronation anthems. I've done the Chandos anthems. Will someone tell me because I'm not well versed in the culture that Handel grew up in or surrounded by or that I haven't studied Handel's culture, so I cannot perform works by that? No.
Well, no, but of course in the U.S. you're not going to be told that because you're not white, and the rules are different, and that is, again, I'm not saying that's like makes sense or that's a logical thing, but it is the reality that we deal with. For example, I saw a conversation on one of these Facebook groups, like you mentioned, and I think actually the African Noel piece might have been the topic of conversation. Now that I look back on it, where somebody was looking for different arrangements of something like that, and I can't remember exactly if it was African Noel or something similar. But I saw one comment where it said, and make sure that if you send me any of the links to these, I would really rather not do any arrangements by any white people because I want to make sure that it's like authentic." And then they proceeded to to use arrangements by American black men who are also not African or from the culture that that song comes from. And that's how confused we are, I think, in the United States, is that we see the skin color oftentimes as a replacement for a culture or like a placeholder for a culture. And if I see somebody that looks more similar to you, then I'm going to assume that they know about music from where you come from. And it's really weird and it drives me crazy.
Which is the same thing. Which is the same thing. I try not to let people box me into, because I've been in some circles where they want to sing spirituals and expect me to program it, and I'm like, I can program it, but I will not program it for the reasons you want me to program it.
Right.
I will program spirituals because it fits into the theme of the concert we're doing.
And you would need to do,
And
and you, with respect, you would need to do quite a bit of research to
yeah,
understand
yes,
that culture.
this is a very soft spot for me, because when I came to the US initially, I had a misconception of spirituals. I didn't know that there was, I had to learn that there's a culture behind it, and you need to understand the culture behind. Now, because I have similar experiences in my African upbringing, I can relate a bit, but it doesn't make me someone to speak for, for that community.
Hmm.
And so it would be really uninformed of anyone to see me and think, oh, we have a black choir director, now we can do spirituals. No, you can't do spirituals. you
Yeah.
know so I will only perform spirituals when I know that it fits with the theme, and not because I look like the people who can, give you the impetus to perform spirituals. Now, that doesn't mean that I am saying, oh, you're white, you're a predominantly white choir, don't perform spirituals. No, I actually want to see that, but I want to know that you understand and appreciate the history
Right.
behind it,
Yep.
and that you can, and that you can actually, you know, go a little step further to put yourself in the situation wherein that spiritual was created, and immerse yourself in the experience to better feel the music. And so that's why I feel like, aside getting the cultural resource, it's good to also get in touch with a human resource to better explain or help put you in the mood to properly, appreciate the music. I had this choir director from Louisiana who did his due diligence in understanding the culture, and if of any song he was teaching us, and the backstory of any song he was teaching us, and if he didn't, he would look for a resource person who knew about it, who was an expert in it. So in the US, I know that there are experts in sub-Saharan African music. I'm trying to carve my niche in that aspect, and and that's because I have both the experience and the pedagogical knowledge to teach that experience. Because more often than not, sub-Saharan African music has a history of being transmitted by oral tradition. So it's only much recently that notational practices started, and you need someone, or you need to find someone who knows how to merge both worlds. I
Yeah.
came from an oral tradition, and I have truly grasped the concept of notational tradition. So I could say that, yes, I've had my professor, one of my professors, ask me what to work on. There was an African piece he was called to be a clinician for. He asked me, so I know you know this. I know you've done this. What do you think I should work on? How do you think I should go about? And that really changed my perspective on this man, and about a lot of Caucasian musicians, because it showed me that not everyone is as uninformed as it's made out to be. It showed me that people actually know what to do. They just may not want to do it,
Yeah.
because it takes nothing to just go online and type, and you get the answers you're looking for. It takes nothing for you to ask around you, the people around you, hey, does anyone know any indigenous African musician that I may want to ask questions to? You know, even if the African musician you're talking to may not know about it, he or she may know someone who knows another person that has the information you're looking for.
Right.
So it's all about human connection. The moment the moment we as choral musicians in America can start talking to each other rather than talking about each other, that's the moment we start to create the network we need to open up access. Because
That's
it is through human connection that we open up access, and then we better understand how to go about things. You know,
that's really
that's
well said.
why that's why I'm on about this research. I believe this is the pioneer research for this kind of, because I haven't seen any research well, people may write about it, but I haven't seen excuse me, I haven't seen articles or papers from indigenous Africans writing about their perspective with regards to access for non-indigenous ensembles and choral musicians to be able to perform works from sub-Saharan Africa. And so it's my hope that other musicians from other parts of Africa can, rely on this avenue to write about their culture and relate it to the American populace with regards to choral music, because I love a lot of American music. Take, for instance, a composer like William Billings. He was among the first big shots of American composers, and I've done a couple of his works. Take, for instance, Aaron Copland, John Cage. These are truly American musicians
Mhm.
that I would, if I were to go back to Africa or do an exchange program in Nigeria, I would take their music and expose my Nigerian musicians to American music. Now, that is what I call an American music. But
Yeah.
you know, that can serve as what you would say American music. But if I take a piece that has been composed in the Cajun dialect of Louisiana, I am also going to say this is also American music from this part of America. You see, so I'm not just going to say, "Oh, I'm going to teach you an American music today," and then you don't see English, you start seeing Cajun.
Right.
You know, uh, I,
That's a
I
good
will need
that's a
to,
good example. Yeah.
yeah, I will need to explain that. Oh, this is Zydeco music from Louisiana. This is indigenous to the Cajun or the Creole people of Louisiana. I should know better to not just uh, give a generic uh, umbrella term for such a song. And so, if I am going to do that, I'm expecting that the same should be done to mine.
Right.
And and that is one way to create. Again, it's all about access. I believe in access. Nothing should limit anyone's access to choral music from any part of the world. And so I look forward to a time in America where I will see an all white choir, an all white people's choir, performing a song indigenous to another part of Africa or Asia, and doing it with such vim and verve that you would think these are actually people who, because I have tried it and I see that it can work.
Right.
I know it works. You know,
Yeah.
if it doesn't work, I wouldn't have been able to teach up to 5 songs. I have taught up to 5 Nigerian songs and 2 South African songs, one Ghanaian song, and one Liberian song. That's how I know it works.
That might be a really good way to go out today. Is if you will
Okay.
just give us your framework of the three re's that you, which to me when I read it seems like it isn't just African cultural musics that would apply to. It's kind of all music, like you said. If I'm going to do it for American music, people should do it for me. So tell us about what that framework is.
So the model I build upon to to talk about or to better create access and authentic performance practice for people with regards to indigenous sub-Saharan African music is what I call the three Re's: resource, research, and resolve. So the first one I've talked a whole lot about resource. Resource is like it's like the creme. It's like the in thing that starts this whole process. There's got to be resource. There's got to be access to that resource, and the resource has to be properly conditioned for people who are seeking the resource to really understand and apply. I mean, music is basically an applied practice. And
Hmm.
so that leads me to the research. So resource basically deals with the the indigenous composers or the people who create the material.
Hmm.
Now research is for the non-indigenous performer. Now research can be in two ways. It could be there could be a self-driven research where like I talked about, a simple Google search, or Facebook post, using the internet, using our technology to our benefit. Now, that could be with that research, you may get, and depending on the quantity of resource available, you may get all you're looking for by a self-driven research. But in a situation where you get just a few things or like breadcrumbs, now there is the other side of research, which is the collaborative research with a culture bearer. So that is also where you use self-driven research to find you a collaborator who is a culture bearer, but not just a culture bearer, but someone who knows the musical nuances of the language, or who can actually give you an informed perspective on how to navigate the music of the culture.
Hmm.
Uh, some people would say it is similar to field work by ethnomusicologists, but the thing about field work is that it takes time. You know, But with a culture bearer who understands the musicality of their people, you don't even have to have them present. See, we're having this podcast online. I could be in Nigeria and be having this podcast with you. You
Hmm.
could set up, you could set up something. Say you want to perform like a Nigerian song, and then you have me as your collaborator. I don't have to be there in person. You could set up like a um something with your choir. Your choir is right there, and then they could sing, and I could give feedback. And that is part of why I keep talking about technology. Technology has opened up has opened up the horizon for access. And
Right.
then the final part, which is the third is resolve. So what you said at the beginning of this podcast, at the start of it, you had mentioned something about, because we cannot, we don't really have what it takes, or I don't think we have what it takes to really perform, or because we don't want any kind of criticism, um, maybe we shouldn't just do it. Now that's where resolve comes in.
Yep.
Every non-indigenous African musician should be able to have the we as an indigenous African musician, I'm saying that we appreciate we would appreciate it if the non-indigenous African musicians can have the resolve to perform indigenous African works in your recitals, your concerts, your church services.
Hmm.
So that's where I highlight um, inclusive programming.
Right. We have to decide that it's important to do that music.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
decision, make that conscious decision to say we're going to do this, be intentional about it. Because, see, in my model, I put an arrow that resolves around the triangle. So it could start from the resolve to say, you know what, this year, I'm going to find one African piece to do. And I'm going to actually find a collaborator. See, it backs up all the way to research. And in researching, you find the resource.
Right. That makes sense.
So it's all intertwined. It depends on where in the model you start. You could start from just a research. Maybe you're just browsing, you know, maybe you're just surfing the net, and then you came across something which is a self-driven. You could just say, okay, I want to look into more of Ghanaian choral music, and then you just start typing, and then you see a few video samples. Because I talk about resource in terms of publishing. They're self-publishing. People would put out their videos. Now you can see a video, you're like, oh, I like the sound of this. I want to research this culture.
Right.
I want to dive in more into this resource. So of course, resource is at is the nitty-gritty of the whole model, but you could start from research. Self-driven research leads you to collaborative research. Then the collaborator might be in the best position to suggest a resource for you.
Yeah.
Now you've already made the resolve ab initio to say, okay, I'm going to do this. Or you could just say, you know what? I am putting up, you just type something out there. I'm putting up a commission for indigenous African works. Anyone who is interested, send me your entries.
Yeah.
You are creating the resource that way. And so it all depends on where in the model, where in the framework you want to start from. Personally, I like to start from the resource. I have a resource already, and then let me dive in more into that resource. Let me research more into that resource. And when I think I have done due diligence of knowing the backstory, knowing the cultural content, knowing the context within which the song was written, knowing the articulations of the language and of the text, both musically and dialectically, then I could say, okay, I want to perform this. That's the result. I'm going to perform this.
Right.
You know,
Well, it sounds like then
I
that
was,
using, sorry to interrupt. I had a thought
yeah,
that
sure, sure,
I
sure.
think this might be an interesting way to think about it. Using your terminology, your three R's, it sounds like the mistake that a lot of, of American directors make, and I fully own guilt, especially earlier in my career, for doing this kind of thing, where I might just have the resolve, but not do any of the other things. In other words, I might decide I want my choir to do something from Africa. And so then where am I going to go? I'm going to go to J.W. Pepper and I'm going to Google African songs or search African songs on J.W. Pepper's website. I'm going to see one that sounds kind of fun and I'm going to click purchase. And I will not have used a resource. I will not have used any research. And I might end up with a piece that is like one of the ones you described that's actually not from the place that it says it's from, or the words don't match the melody. And there's all these different, almost Frankenstein's monster of different African musical influences. Um, do you know what I'm saying? Like
Yes,
that's a
yes.
pretty common mistake I think that we make. We with good intentions, like the American director says, I want to diversify my program. I want to make sure I include something from Africa, but then we don't do the other two REs, the two
Yeah.
reads.
Yeah, which is why I'm putting it out there to let us all see that, and like you rightly pointed out, it's not just about African music. It applies to. I, I see that I have done stuff like this in my recitals because when I program um, Bach Cantata 70, Vaket, Betet, Betet, Vaket. If I program that song, I I'm not just gonna take I'm not just gonna go to Carlos Verlag online, purchase the piece, start pounding notes and rhythms. No, I have to understand why did he write it, and I have to understand what Bach was thinking. I have to understand
What does German
where
sound like?
does yeah, what does it sound like?
Yeah.
Where does it fit in the service? How is this used? You know, and then that way I can better appreciate the culture behind it because don't get me wrong, every part of the world has a culture. People like to say, "Oh, there's no culture in America." There is culture. There are lots of cultures in America.
Hmm.
You know, I
Hmm.
I have seen it. I have experienced the culture, and so I know Germany has a culture, and it's evident in their choral art music. So this is what I have to research into. I have the resource already, of course. The resource is very readily available, and so I have to research into it. And in researching into it, I am convincing myself that I have enough resolve to perform this.
Right.
So if I'm doing this, if I'm taking this approach and if I'm applying this model, I think if I reverse engineer it for others to apply to music that is not necessarily Western art music, it can work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really, really well said. Now, this has been awesome, Ezeakacha. This great conversation. I
Thank you,
think
Chris.
really, really important insights, and I think people are going to find this helpful. Like I said, we'll put some maybe like a little summary of what you are working on in the show notes, and I'll put different ways to contact you so people can use you as a resource if that's what they need as well. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me. I appreciate this. I'm looking forward to more conversations we can have, and maybe I could learn a thing or two about there. I mean, of course I'd have questions I'd like to talk about, but maybe after this. But this was good. I really enjoyed myself
Good.
being on your show.
Thanks everyone for sticking around. I hope you learned something from that episode, and I also hope that we inspired you to think a little bit differently about the way that you use your language when it's related to diversity. Are you using language that celebrates how different and individually unique we all are? Because if you follow diversity down the rabbit hole of logic to its conclusion, obviously we're going to arrive at the most diverse way of looking at humans that is possible, which is looking at individuals. We are all different. We are all beautiful and unique. And when we celebrate diversity, do we celebrate it with a language that helps us see this? Or do we celebrate it with language that causes us to see each other simply as faceless members of groups? So a different way to look at and a different way to discuss this topic, I think, is always necessary and needed. And I was refreshed by the way Ezeakacha was able to help us see and articulate this need for zooming in a little bit closer at the music of our colleagues from African countries. On the way out, don't forget to like, share, leave comments, participate in the conversation, join the conversation either at choralosophy.substack.com or on the Choralosopher's Facebook page, or anywhere on social media that you see the show. And of course, use that promo code at sightreadingfactory.com, mymusicfolders.com, graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.